Welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're unpacking the theoretical blueprint of an entire economic engine, the socialistic economy. We're going straight to the academic source material to see exactly how this system is designed to function on paper. So, whether you're totally new to macroeconomics or you just want a structured refresher on how different global systems operate, we're going to map it all out for you, step by step. Let's get started.
To really understand any system, you first have to understand the problem it was trying to solve. And according to our source material, the primary catalyst for socialism was a direct reaction to existing systems. The text explicitly states that this new economic model emerged with one very specific goal: to remove the exploitation of man by man. It was built from the ground up as an alternative structure intended to completely eliminate the exploitation often found in private enterprise.
Here's our roadmap for today. 1. The origins of socialism. 2. Defining a socialist economy. 3. State ownership and production. 4. Planning for social welfare. 5. Equality and mutual cooperation. And 6. The reality of income equality. All right, let's dive into this.
Section 1. The origins of socialism. From theory to state.
The source material gives us a super clear timeline for how this system evolved. The initial credit for formalizing socialism into a popular economic framework goes to Karl Marx, who laid out those famous communist economic principles in his 1867 book, Das Kapital. But it wasn't until 1917 that the theory actually jumped off the page and into reality, when the Soviet Union became the first country in the world to establish an economy based on these Marxian principles. After World War II, most Eastern European countries adopted the system, and while it eventually collapsed in many of those initial nations, the source notes that the socialist framework was later adopted and continues to be maintained by countries like China, Vietnam, and Cuba.
Section 2. Defining a socialist economy, the macro view.
So, what does this actually look like? Well, here's the textbook definition provided by our source. Socialism is an economic system where the means of production are owned, operated, and managed by the government or public authority, according to a general economic plan, all for the benefit of the whole society. Picture a massive central government planning commission mapping out every single resource. Every factory, every plot of agricultural land, every mine, every bank. They all belong entirely to the state. Instead of private individuals owning these assets for personal profit, the government runs the whole production apparatus to benefit society as a whole.
Now, this definition essentially boils down to three crucial pillars. According to the source, everything in a socialist economy rests on these concepts. First, the means of production are held by the state. Second, resource utilization is strictly dictated by central planning, not market forces. And third, social welfare is the chief motivating force behind all economic activities. These pillars form the absolute foundation of the entire model.
Section 3. State ownership and production. Control mechanisms.
Let's look at the very first defining feature of a socialist economy: social property. Under this framework, private property, at least as we traditionally know it, is completely abolished. You won't find private citizens holding the deeds to massive manufacturing plants or vast tracts of natural resources. All the means of production, the land, the mines, the factories, the banks, belong entirely to society, which is represented and controlled by the state.
And a direct consequence of that state ownership is feature number 2. The government is the only producer. Since private enterprise doesn't exist in this model, producing literally all commodities falls under state control. Imagine the government having to figure out the supply chain for everything from giant steel girders all the way down to your daily toothbrush. All of these basic economic problems, like raw material distribution and output targets, are solved exclusively through government economic planning.
Section 4. Planning for social welfare, the driving motive.
Now we get to features 3 and 4, which are all about motive. According to the source, the self-interest and profit motives that you'd find in capitalism are entirely replaced here by a social welfare motive. Maximizing societal welfare is the main engine driving all economic activity. To pull this off, a central planning authority steps in to decide exactly what to produce, how to produce it, and for whom to produce it. But importantly, the text notes that these economic plans aren't totally rigid. They're deliberately flexible so they can adapt to the changing needs of the country.
Section 5. Equality and mutual cooperation, the intended outcomes.
As the source material outlines, extreme income inequality is considered socially unjust, politically undesirable, and economically bad within this framework. So, at its core, the system aims for economic equality. It acts as a leveling mechanism to ensure a fair distribution of the economy, rewards, opportunities, and resources. Crucially, this also means providing equal employment opportunities to everyone, developing their talents, and giving them the training they need, absolutely regardless of their background, caste, creed, or religion.
Another fascinating intended outcome is the total absence of competition. The source points out that while capitalist systems view competition as a driver of efficiency, the socialist blueprint sees it very differently. It argues that competition among different production units actually results in a massive waste of national resources. Since the government is the only producer, there's just no scope for competition anyway. Instead, the system relies entirely on mutual cooperation to ensure resources are used strictly for the planned social good.
Section 6. The reality of income equality. Nuance in the system.
Now, let me pose a direct question to you, drawn straight from our source material. Is there complete equality of income in a socialist economy? Does every single citizen, regardless of their job, take home the exact same paycheck? Take a second and think about what the logical answer might be under a system that champions economic equality.
Well, the answer is actually no. There is not complete equality of income. Our source makes a really critical distinction here. What socialism abolishes are the massive wealth disparities that come from private property and inheritance laws. Because you can't privately own a factory or inherit a massive estate, that specific type of inequality is gone. However, the system absolutely maintains wage differences that arise from varying levels of efficiency and skill.
So the crucial point is that a certain degree of income inequality is actually considered essential to making the whole system work. Why? Because it promotes necessary incentives for work. The academic framework acknowledges a basic truth of human nature. If everyone got the exact same income no matter what they did, no one would ever strive to become more skilled or work harder. Without incentives, progress just stalls out. Therefore, the source concludes that complete equality of income is neither possible nor desirable. Workers receive fair wages based on their work, meaning equal opportunity is guaranteed, but the final outcome in your paycheck is fundamentally tied to your individual skill and effort. Which brings us to the final thought for today's explainer. We've seen the blueprint, from abolishing private property to the massive undertaking of central planning aimed at social welfare. But if complete economic equality mathematically removes the incentive to work, how does a centrally planned economy perfectly balance the overarching promise of social welfare with the undeniable necessity of individual motivation? It's the core tension of the socialist blueprint, and a really fascinating question to keep in mind as you look at historical and modern examples of this system in action. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.